Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today, Trina and I are going to be discussing CEO stuff. Being the CEO is completely different from being the technician, from being the manager. It's its own position in this ball game that we call business. We're going to be sharing personal stories, mostly from Trina. She knows more than I do. One of the reasons I'm talking to her. We hope you get value from this conversation. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here.
Of course.
Yes, it's been a while.
Yeah, I'm a little stuffy this morning, but I think it'll be okay.
Well, it is that time of year.
Hopefully I don't sound too awful to listen to.
Well, let's hope not. I'll just put a filter on it. Today, we decided to talk about CEO stuff because that's what you and I are both involved in. That's what you're coaching me on right now, is trying to think like a CEO. And it was really fun when you're like, so what does being a CEO entail? And I was like, that's why I'm talking to you. I don't know what to say. And it's come up a bunch because with this winter season, for me, my slow season, that's when I need to be preparing to expand and grow my business. And Jim Rohn said, what do ants do all summer? They prepare for winter. And that's kind of what I'm doing, is this winter I need to prepare for summer, so it's not like I necessarily get it off.
Yeah.
So when it comes to being CEO and putting yourself in the CEO shoes, if you're looking to actually have a business and not just be self-employed, what did that look like for you when you had to do that?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you my story a little bit. So I became CEO, meaning I delegated everything to everyone. I had an operations manager who made sure the day-to-day was good. And I found myself in the CEO role, and I was like you. I'm like, what does this mean? I mean, I feel useless. I have nothing to do. Everybody's doing everything. Like, stuff's running. The business is making money. But what am I doing? Like, what am I supposed to be doing right now? And so I dove into a couple books about CEO and what that looks like. And, for everybody, it looks a little different. I was a CEO of my own company. And it was, in the grand scheme of things, a very small company. And so my experience might be different than somebody else's. But speaking for myself, CEO was making sure everything continues to operate. And I wasn't doing much. It didn't seem like. But what I was doing was the stuff you didn't see. So
Right. It's below the tip of the iceberg.
yeah. So I dove in, and a lot of the stuff I read was, the CEO. You're the presence of the company. You are the culture of the company. You set everybody's expectations, like what you expect from them. And as long as they're doing it, the job's fairly easy because, it's a lot of, I would plan events for my employees, appreciation stuff. It was a lot of thinking about the employees, spending time with the employees. So showing up on jobs just to say, hey, how's it going? Not to nitpick them or to train them or anything like that, but just to show up and say hi. It's a lot of employee appreciation.
To support the base.
To support the culture, to support the business, to, keep people doing their jobs. And then a lot of community stuff. So I would go out and grow our brand through community involvement and going to charity events and donating baskets to the auctions. And
sounds a lot like being the Queen of England, where it looks like you don't do much, but then like once you're dead and you get replaced, it's like, okay, who's this Joker?
Yes.
Who's this guy?
That's the twist in the story was, I just sold my company a month ago, and I didn't realize my role and its significance until I sold the company. And so it was super eye-opening because the whole time, I really felt kind of worthless. I think that was, it was always the plan to sell the company, so I can't say that's why I decided to sell the company, but being in the CEO role for me, I was like, I don't feel like I'm doing enough. I don't feel like I'm doing anything. It didn't feel fulfilling because I felt useless.
Right.
Because I had everybody doing stuff, and I was like, okay, well, they all know what they're doing. Like, they clearly are fine.
I never got into the show Mad Men, did you?
No.
Well, it's all about 1950s advertising. And in the first few episodes that I watched, there was one point where like the head guy of a marketing outfit walks in on the their main advertiser, Don Draper. And Don Draper's just sitting there smoking indoors. And the CEO walks in and he says, I forget sometimes that some of your hardest work you do while you're just sitting there doing
Yeah.
nothing. And it sounds like that's kind of the same thing as where your job is to make sure you don't have a job.
Yeah.
And that's been my experience being the head of some of the service organizations I've been in, is where I know I'm doing a good job when I don't have a job.
Yeah.
When I don't have to tell people what to do or put out
Yeah.
fires, that means I've done a good job
Yeah.
because my team's doing a good
Yeah.
job.
And it's not doing anything. It's kind of like fishing.
Mm.
It's a lot of sitting there. And you're just waiting for that bite. But when you get that bite, that's when the work happens. So that's like a CEO. So because I put everything in place, all the expectations, everybody knew what to expect. Everybody knew their job roles. Everybody knows what they're doing, and they're doing it. I'm just sitting there waiting. I'm just waiting for that bite that sends me into, okay, now it's my time to step in, because you have to have a gauge on the company, like you would have a gauge on the fish in the water,
You have to have your finger on the pulse.
Yes, you have to have your finger on the pulse, and you have to know what's going on, and the CEO keeps an eye on that stuff and adjusts it as necessary. So a lot of what I did was making sure I'm reading the proper things about the economy and looking ahead, saying where are we going? The Titanic hit an iceberg because the CEO wasn't paying attention. You know what I mean? Like, I'm
Right.
looking for those icebergs out there and making sure we don't hit them. I'm adjusting as I see necessary. I'm saying, here's where we advertise, here's what we're advertising. I'm delegating these roles to people because I say, here's what we're advertising. I don't actually put the ad together. I don't call the newspaper. I don't do that. I just say,
Right.
here's what we're doing, and it gets done.
Right.
So, and like I was saying earlier, I didn't realize my significance until I sold the business, because as soon as I sold the business, the employees stopped. And they're like, oh. And they look at the new owners and they're like, what do we do? And that's when I realized, oh.
What do you want from us?
Actually, they held everything together because I was the presence that put it together, and I was there, and I kept them on their jobs. But as soon as a new leader came in, they stopped and they looked at the new leader and they're like, do we resume activities, or are you changing something?
Right.
And
What are your expectations
yes,
of us?
and that's when I was like, okay, so even though I actively wasn't doing very much, the company couldn't function without me, because I'm the one, like I said, making sure we don't hit icebergs, or keeping the gauge on the temperature of the water and making sure the frogs don't boil.
Right.
And
Right. Well, one of my biggest issues has been thinking that everybody thinks the way I do,
yeah,
which I think is a common failure of
yes,
us humans. And
everybody thinks that.
right, right, that's what it appears to be
Yeah.
the case. And for me, it was a shock. One of the few times I worked a job in retail, and I was trying to promote Toastmasters to management. And I would ask my fellow associates and my superiors. What were they looking to do? Maybe Toastmasters would help them move up. And every single one I talked to were content with where they were.
Right.
They were just happy with the status quo. They didn't want to advance. And I grew up my whole life thinking, the corporate world, it's dog eat dog because everybody's looking to get ahead. No,
Yeah.
about 5% are looking to get
Yeah.
ahead. That's about it. And that's why, and because it would shock me when I would hear, oh, people would get excited about a 27-cent raise in 6 months.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
Yeah.
That's not progress.
Yeah.
But all they had to see was some sort of progress, and that they were moving ahead somehow,
Right.
and they weren't backsliding, and they were content.
Yeah.
They were content. And I didn't realize that about people, and that's one of the things with employees is where my first thought is, well, if I can do it, they can do it, which means why would they want to work for me?
Yeah.
Because most people want
Yeah.
that. That's
Yeah.
why.
Yeah.
And one thing I just thought of while you were talking was there are times where I kick myself because I feel like I've made no progress at all. And I have to remind myself it's because I'm comparing myself to other people who are exceptional specimens.
Yeah.
I mean, 0.1% of people, if that, who are just hyper successful, productive. And one of the things I thought of just now was when I first got into kind of this realm, I was trying to read books on success and finance and all this and that, and they were all talking about how to turn 100,000 into 500,000 and all this stuff. And I was like, where to invest and how to know where to invest in real estate and this. I'm like, wait. I want to know how to not live paycheck to paycheck. Like, I don't need this. Like, give me something. How do I get ahead of the eight ball? And the book I last found was The Richest Man in Babylon. And that was a place I could start.
Yeah.
And now it's funny talking to you of now where I'm ahead of the eight ball, and now I'm like, okay, how do I do that CEO stuff?
Yeah.
And again, there are a bunch of books where it's like, you know, get into all these details about things. I'm like, wait, I'm not trying to run 500 people. I'm trying to run a crew of 2.
Yeah.
How do I do that?
Yeah.
And it feels like a small thing because it's something I did. But looking at it objectively, being able to go from broke, homeless, and unemployed, trying to figure out how to not live hand to mouth, to now it's like, okay, how do I manage a crew of 2? And this idea that a lot of people have, mostly ne'er-do-wells, of, oh, those people don't have problems. No, we just have better problems.
Yeah.
Like, that's one of the things that I found is that it seems like my entire aim in life is to have better problems.
Yeah.
Because it's, there were even times when I was in the thick of it where I was embarrassed, not because of materialistic things per se, but I was embarrassed that my problems were problems for me, such as, how do I get a place to live?
Mm-hmm.
Where do I get a place to live? How do I get by without credit? Like, these things were giant problems, and I was embarrassed by the size of my problems.
Yeah.
But I had to get through those in order to get better problems, and that seems to be how humans are driven, is finding better problems.
Yeah. Yeah, the problems never end.
Right.
Like, they're just different problems, better problems, more problems. I think the higher you go, the more you have. Problems that you don't think should be problems.
I,
Like,
s- I saw a meme and it was an old picture, an old fashioned looking one. I don't know if it was AI or whatnot, but there's a guy on a couch with his hands in his hands and a gal next to him. You know, they looked like 1860s.
yeah,
And it said, being in a relationship is all about solving problems together, which you wouldn't have in the first place if you were single.
yeah,
It was
yeah, and like problems that you wouldn't think would be problems. Everybody strives to make money. Well, when you have money, it's a problem.
right.
Like
Like
too much money is a problem.
there are people where their entire
Like
job is
what do
to
you?
manage their money for you.
Yes, exactly. Like you
I
can't
want to
just
have
have
that
a bunch of
problem.
money. You have to manage the money when you have
Right,
it, and
right.
that's a problem.
That's a really good problem to have.
But that's what I mean. Is like there's problems that people are like, you have too much money. How is that a problem?
Right. Well,
Well, let me tell you.
right, it's like Cliff told me about a guy, I think he read about, who made a bunch of millions, and then he hit his upper limit, and then he then went a million or two in the red. Excuse me. And he sat down and he decided that the problem he wanted to have was to pay a million a year just in taxes.
Yeah.
Of where it's like, Cliff is fond to saying we all have our own brand of rat poison. And that kind of seems to be the thing, is where it's like you pick your problems,
Yeah.
and there's always a trade off to things. It's like the simple life of go out and homestead, have kids, make your own butter, raise your own livestock, do all those things.
All the problems.
That may be idealistic, but it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
And there's a lot that can go wrong.
Yes.
But some people would rather deal with those problems than the problems that arise in a corporate office.
Yeah.
And there are some who would rather deal with the problems that arise in a corporate office than deal with the fact that they have to have backup propane for the backup generator for when the power goes out, because they live on top of a mountain.
Yeah. I have all of those problems right now. All
nice,
of them.
Nice. Of course you do.
Yeah. My cat has a cold. That's a problem. I have 1,200-pound bales of hay in my pasture right now that are a problem because the tractor is broke, so that's a problem.
So you can't haul the bales out.
Yeah, I mean, I got
And
all
just gotta
sorts of
sit
like
there.
problems right now on the homestead side, because that also is something that I've done since 19 is, grow my own food, have my animals, so I have that aspect too, and I'm like, there are so many problems on homesteading.
Mm-hmm.
That are real problems. Like,
right.
How do you move a 1,200-pound bale of hay? Like,
right. You don't. If you don't have a tractor, you don't.
Yeah.
But like that's the thing. That was one of the things I made it very clear in my head a couple years ago, was all of the problems that come with marriage sure as hell beat all the problems that come with having girlfriends.
Yeah.
Like I would rather I would rather deal with issues of one woman who is committed to me than deal with all the issues that come up from a bunch of women who aren't.
Yeah.
It's a better problem to have.
Yeah.
And this idea that at some point, oh, I'm going to be happy and have no worries, no problems. For one, you won't be happy. It's like that thing of where the fact that humans have letters to represent imaginary numbers is proof that we create our own problems.
Yeah.
Like, we actually do it. We just have to find better problems. And I would rather deal with the problem of figuring out how to manage a crew of 2 than how to make rent next week.
Right. Yeah. Definitely.
What were some of your biggest problems that came up when you first began to hire?
Oh, honestly, the first crew is the easiest.
Really?
Yeah, like the first, because I hired employees right out of the gate. Like my first year, I was part-time. I was still an employee, and I was working on my own. Also, no employees then. But that next year, the first year I went full time with my business, I hired employees. And I did exactly what I was explaining to you, where I had one crew, 2 people. I would get on the job with them initially, show them what to do, walk them through it. I would talk to the client, and then I'd boogie out of there.
Okay.
And I'd feel guilty because I'm like, I just don't want to be on the job. You know, like, I didn't really have, I had stuff to do, but I didn't have to leave, like I said. But I wanted them to be on their own. I didn't want to have to be there. So, and then, like I said, I'd come back when there was enough time left that if they didn't meet my expectation, I could help them and get the job done on time still.
That makes sense.
So managing like that was super easy because I was still technically out in the field. I was still on the job sites, every job site. I just would meet them on the job sites and make sure that they understood the assignment.
You were being more of like a foreman.
Yes. And then I'd leave, go pick plants or whatever, there's always stuff to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't on the job. I was running around, making sure all the wheels were still turning. And that was probably the funnest time of the business. And it went fairly well. Like, because I was very involved with the employees still. Like, it just kind of went okay. There weren't a lot of complaints. It was fun. It was adding the second crew where it started to get dicey because I couldn't be on every site all the time. So I would have to assign leads, and then I'd have to make sure and that's when I'd get calls. They missed a patch of weeds, or they didn't haul off this debris, or, that was the thing, was lowering my expectations. So we talked about this a little bit, and it's like, my prices went up because I had now overhead. I had crews, I had an office, I had trucks, multiple trucks. So I had, expenses to the business, and I wasn't doing the work anymore. And when you have employees, one thing you realize as a business owner is it takes 2 people to do what you did as one. Like, that's realistic.
Right.
Because nobody's going to work as hard as you. Nobody's going to go above and beyond like you do because you're hustling, because it's your business, it's your baby.
They're not as invested as you. They don't have as much skin in the game, and it's unfair to expect them to care as much as you do.
Yeah.
And I've had a boss who expected that of me, and I was too young and naive to realize that was not realistic.
Yep.
And but by work ethic, it made me feel guilty.
Yeah.
And they have thoroughly abused that part of it, and that's why I quit.
Right. And, it's not fair for a business owner to put that on employees. Like,
right.
That's what I was saying. When you hire your first crew, you need to expect those 2 people will do what you did by yourself. And that was a challenge because I had to shift my thinking a little bit. And that was something I had to do. Not something anybody else had to do. I had to accept the fact that it takes 2 people to do what I did as one, and that they're not going to do as much as I did. And that's where, I'm like, okay, but I'm charging a higher price, and the client is actually getting a little bit less of a service. But that's where we were talking about
maintaining the standard.
There's a standard, and most business owners want to be the best, so they go above and beyond. Like, I'm getting leaves out of every nook and cranny. I'm like doing things that really shouldn't even be part of the job. Like, I'm going above and beyond, hanging lights and all kinds of stuff, and that's not what it should be, because it's not sustainable. Like, I can't grow my business. I can't maintain that year in and year out forever. So really, it's a better service if I'm able to hire crews who do a little bit less work, but they're consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not, if they burn out, I replace the crew. If an employee burns out, I hire a new employee. So the service is never skipping a beat. Everybody's showing up on time, doing what they need to do. As where when it's just you, you're going to burn out. And your work is going to diminish as time goes because of that burnout.
Right.
So really, the better service for the client is one that's more consistent and sustainable over a long period of time.
Right, because it's a marathon, not a sprint.
So, realizing, and I always try to get them to do the best that I could get them to do, but just understanding they're not going to do the little things that I did.
Right.
And that's okay.
Right.
And clients were okay with it
Right.
because they're getting their service, they're getting it consistently, they're getting it continuously over a long period of time.
Right.
So,
Well, it's a bit like any other type of relationship, is where some people are addicted to the extreme highs and lows. Most people desire consistency.
uh-huh.
I think that's one of the reasons why marriage became a thing in the first place. And as far as maintaining that standard, very few of my clients see how I go above and
Yeah,
beyond. And they still love me.
right.
It it reminds me of when I was young and first window cleaning, and I would talk to managers of storefronts or owners of businesses where we would clean commercially, and talking to them, I began to realize where if an employee showed up on time,
Yep.
did what he was supposed to do, the literal bare minimum,
Yeah.
and didn't leave before he was supposed to, and he did that 99% of the time, gold star employee
Uh-huh.
across the board, favorite of the boss, just
Yeah.
boom. And I I talked about this with a guy I worked with. We framed some houses, and he was also young and homeschooled, and I talked about how my parents completely skewed my vision of the world because I thought that showing up 15 minutes early with a good attitude, doing 10% more, and staying 15 minutes late and maybe working a weekend if asked to do so was what you had to do just to keep a job.
Yeah.
And then to advance, you had to then step it up a
Right.
notch from there. Where it's like, if you show up with a pulse,
Yeah.
do what you're supposed to do and don't leave before you're supposed to, happy, boss is over
Yeah.
the moon.
And maybe times have changed because that's what I keep hearing. Um, it's probably changed from the 50s where that was what you did. You got a corporate good job. You worked your way up the ladder. Now people don't look for a job that they're going to be at their lifetime and retire from. It seems like.
Mm.
Um, I know I was talking to one of my friends who works for a corporate bank, and she was saying that they actually recommend that you look for a new job every few years because that's how you make more money.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting. Times have definitely changed. I think it used to be, what your parents taught, where you had to do that to work up the ladder. But now people work their way up the ladder
By
by
moving
moving.
laterally.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. And it sucks for employers, honestly, but
Right.
it is what it is. And new environment,
Mm-hmm.
new generation.
Well, there's I think part of it is because the culture has switched from finding joy and self-esteem in one's work.
Yeah,
There's not an emphasis on that.
yeah,
For me growing up, everything I did from chores around the house to work I did for other people was a reflection of me.
mm-hmm.
Not only that, it was a reflection on my last name.
Yeah,
My mother made it very clear that we're her representatives in the community.
yeah,
And she put that responsibility and expectation on us where this isn't just about you.
yeah,
And having that idea of what I do even when no one else is looking is still a reflection of myself.
yeah,
That's a big deal. And it was really nice because one of our guests at breakfast, sometimes I'm uncertain how she feels about me, but I was really surprised when she loved on me a little bit a couple months ago and said, no matter what I do or end up doing, she has trust that I'll do it just as well as I do window cleaning.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that where there's like, oh, what you do in the micro is what you'll do in the macro. And it's fun because the relationships I have that are the best ones have been where people have noticed details
Yeah.
about me. Like I have a client who's become a good friend of mine and a good friend of my parents where I was cleaning the windows at his house. We just talked on the phone and he was on his way out when I got there and he saw me in my pullover and white button down and he like kind of paused and
Yeah.
came back because he noticed some details.
Yeah.
There were some of the finer things about how I showed up, and by fine I mean small
Yeah.
details that made him start to question me and ask me questions. And before too long, I realized we were both sharing our 30-second elevator speech intros,
Yeah.
and uh, we've become friends. I have a personal relationship with this 50-year-old man,
Yeah.
and it's because of the micro that I did in my work
Mm-hmm.
about how I showed up and how I talked to him. And that's been really fun
Yeah.
of building those relationships built on that. And a lot of that comes from the culture I was raised in of everything you do reflects on who you are. And who you are is reflected in your work. Like it's a feedback loop. And I forget that not everybody's like
Right.
that when it comes to work and prospective employees and that type of deal.
Yeah.
So there are a couple young men that have had work for me before and that I'm hoping to work with them next year, and I think it would be good for
Yeah.
everyone involved. But to have to like I said, it's nice to have that better problem of putting myself from how do I get a paycheck ahead of paycheck to
Yeah.
paycheck to, oh gosh, how do I manage people?
Yeah. Well, and then it becomes how do you get your employees so that they're not paycheck to paycheck?
Right.
That was always a big thing for me was I wanted better for my employees. But that goes back to not everybody thinks like me. Not every employee wants better for themselves.
Right.
You know?
And there's the thing too is where sometimes the worst thing you can do for a person is pay them more because then they'll just get into more
Yeah.
problems.
And so that, as big challenges as a CEO, I think that's one of the biggest is wanting better for employees that don't want better for themselves. I mean, it's like the parent who wants
Has
the best for their child, and the
their
child
adult
just
child.
goes out and does drugs and lives on the street. You know what I mean? Like,
Right, where it's like there's nothing you can do,
yeah.
but you're still
And,
invested.
I feel like being a CEO is like being a parent in a way because you care about your employees and you want what's best for them, and
Right.
they don't all want that, and it's okay. And it's learning to just again shift the mindset, and yeah, you have to
Yeah.
treat each employee differently because um, they're all different, and if you treat them all the same, it doesn't work. And so,
But there's still a standard.
yeah,
Like, and all things are still, yeah.
yeah. So, and I wasn't a CEO for very long. Like I was CEO
You
for
dipped.
4 years, and I'm like, I'm out.
I've done. This is all this not doing much is doing way too much.
Yeah. But I'll be there again, like starting another business, and I'm sure I'll get there again. And I think the lesson that I take away from that is walking away realizing if I didn't sell my business, I still wouldn't realize how impactful my role actually was.
Right.
And now that I know that, I don't think I'll have the same guilt I had this time of like, I feel useless. I feel like I'm not doing anything. I feel like I'm not pulling my own weight, because now I realize, okay, I actually was.
I'm sure I have some ex-girlfriends who feel that way. I didn't know how important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, the I really liked how before the podcast we had brought up about the standard, and where it's not doing bad work, it's about what is the standard.
Mm-hmm.
And me thinking about this since our last uh, brainstorming was our last meeting. I'm not sure what we call our coaching appointments, but is realizing, the standard is clean windows.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything else I do above and beyond that, that's my own personal brand.
Yeah.
And for me, I know it's, showing up in a white button down, showing up groomed, switching shoes, going in and out of the house. And just that right there is what sets me apart.
Yeah.
And that is what they actually see, not
Right.
the extra details and attention to detail with the window. As long as it's clean,
Yep.
that's what they see, is how you show up, the results of your work, and how it is you leave.
Yep.
And that standard is still above what they would get elsewhere.
Right.
And that's important to me.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Exactly.
thanks so much for being here.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for our chat before and after. It's fun because a lot of what goes into this podcast occurs off camera.
Yeah. And
just like being a CEO.
I know today's a short one, but I'm glad we got to do this anyway. So,
Well,
and hopefully the conversation was useful, and if you get feedback and things that we could go deeper on, I'd be more than happy to in a future podcast.
Yeah, I'll be sure to put that in
Yeah.
the intro and the description. And awesome. Well, thanks so much. This was a load of fun as always, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.